All right. Thank you for taking time out of your schedules to come in and have a conversation with the Michigan Center High School U.S. history students here. So I want to say thank you for your service, and I really appreciate you guys coming in. Let's start off with, you guys were all born and raised in Michigan and spent most of your lives here. The vast majority of the students I have in class are from Michigan, from the local area. When you got to Vietnam, how would you say, what was the first thing that struck you as far as how the weather, climate, and even wildlife was different from here in Michigan?
Well, for me, as I got ready to go and fly to Vietnam, it was winter here. So, being in the Navy, we had to wear dress blues, which were wool. So, we rode over in the plane about 20, 24 hours over there. And as they opened the plane door, you got instantly this blast furnace hit you in the face. It was sticky, stinky. There's a stench that you'll never forget. Anybody that ever walked off that plane thought they were walking into a huge vegetating swamp. That's all I can think of. And it stuck with you. And everything you wore when you were there smelled like that.
Yeah.
So that's what, in my eyes, is what it felt like.
How frequently did it rain?
Well, it depends. If it was monsoon season, it rained about every day. And for about 3 months, it rained, and then it rained some more. It would be, during non-monsoon, it'd be 80, 90 with 90% humidity. And when it rained, it would be 70, which you thought you were freezing to death.
Yes.
But the rain would just continually rain, or storm, or whatever they would have, whatever would go on. But it was definitely, you walked in mud and water all the time.
Yeah. Sounds like a big contrast from Michigan.
Oh, it was nothing like Michigan. I couldn't tell you that anything was like Michigan to me, anyways.
How was the wildlife different? I believe there's some more dangerous animals.
Well, yeah, Doc can tell you about the snakes.
They had several varieties of poisonous snakes, and one we call the bamboo viper, and we kind of nicknamed it the 9-pacer. It's a neurotoxic venom, and what it does, it shuts down your nervous system. So if you get bitten, normally they would say you take about 9 paces and down you go, and your nervous system would shut down, your heart, lungs, and breathing. And if you didn't have an anti-venom, you were in big trouble. We ran into them quite a bit. They were little green snakes, not very large, but they would hang from their tails on the low-hanging branches. And if the point man was out, blazing the trail, he would be looking down to watch for booby traps and things, and he wasn't paying attention, and the snakes would, strike him more on the head area, and that was pretty bad. They had large centipedes there too that were quite toxic, and we had one that we were out camping, and one crawled into a sleeping bag, and during the night he got bitten and heard this tremendous scream. What was happening? He was going into anaphylactic shock, and we had to bring in a medevac in the middle of the night. And we exposed ourselves because we had to use a spotlight on a helicopter to come in and take him out. And we were exposed to the enemy. But, we had all kinds of nasty, good-sized critters that were poisonous.
Well, I'm glad we don't have any 9-pacers or poisonous centipedes in my backyard. Yeah. Well, I would imagine that change in scenery and just dramatic change in just climate and conditions combined with being in combat would lead to a lot of mental stress. Could you guys talk about that? How you dealt with the stress, how it increased your just kind of overall mental stress level, and how you saw it affect American soldiers?
Well, the stress level would be high most of the time. I don't care where you were. If you were in Vietnam, you have to think that anytime, any blaze anywhere, somebody could take a pot shot at you or send a rocket at you or mortar you. A lot of people didn't deal with the stress. They became alcoholics or they became drug addicts. The way I dealt with the stress was getting involved with a few of the other guys and doing fun things, trying to figure out ways to get my mind cleared. Because I had access to trucks, one of the things we did was on our free time, we would drive down and go down to the orphanage and see the orphans that were down there and take them fruit and stuff. Even though on the way there they would always shell us or shoot at us, but that's how we did. We tried to put our mind elsewhere. I mean, it still didn't take it away from me, but I mean, I don't know how, everybody had to deal with it a different way.
I think with me, my brain kind of put it into like a memory bank that I could access later. It just kind of as a self-protection type of device. It just didn't affect me until years later. But I think, because you couldn't take the time to stop and mourn, because the next day you went through the same experience, and over time you're just exposed to it so much that your memory bank just kind of shuts down. And but years later something will trigger that memory and bring it back.
Sure.
Yeah.
Become numb to it at the moment, but
Pretty much,
yeah.
yes.
So having those elevated stress levels, we know that often will lead to substance abuse and drug use, which, from what I know of it, were pretty ubiquitous over in Vietnam, that part of the world. Could you talk a little bit about just how you saw American soldiers in general, dealing with like substance abuse in regards to what did you see used most frequently? Alcohol, marijuana, opium, or heroin? Any of those, and how that tied into American soldiers?
Go ahead.
With my unit, it seemed to be alcohol was the biggest crutch that they used. A lot of times in the field, the guys would have marijuana with them when they were supposed to be on duty, watching for the enemy to come upon them. They would be, smoking the dope and getting a little bit mellow, and weren't alert. And it was dangerous because the enemy could sneak up on them and take them out. And they were supposed to be, our first line of defense, especially the guys on the listening post. If they were high, then we were in danger too. So, we tried to encourage them not to do it, but it was prevalent back in the rear. Sometimes the guys would, a whole company of them would get into a tent and they would have their smoke hours, and it was pretty much tolerated by the supervisors.
So there weren't any major consequences then, did you see, or would guys get in trouble in certain situations?
Very, very rarely, but every once in a while out in the field, if guys were not alert, it caused their casualty or maybe somebody else's casualty.
Did you see harder drugs like opium and heroin being used by American soldiers or even the local population?
Well, about the only thing that I saw was when we had civilians come on our bases, and we would pay them like with sea rations and things like that to have them fill sandbags. Mm-hmm. And during their working hours, they would always have a pot of tea brewing, and found out later that they were using some opium in the tea, so they would drink it, and they were high all day long and happy to go lucky, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But usually the civilians, but as far as the soldiers, not so much.
Mm-hmm. One other drug that I'm not too familiar with, and I'm guessing most of our students would know nothing about, but chatting ahead of this video, it was talking to you guys about, was the betel nut. Could you talk about that and explain it to what that is and how it be used to our students?
It comes from some kind of a tree, and it's a nut, and it's real dark. It's really dark brown, and they use it like kind of we do, chewing tobacco. They chew on it, and you get a little bit of juice going on, and you get a little bit of a high off of it. And especially the ladies would chew that a lot. And the thing that it did was it would turn your teeth black. So you would go up talk to them, and they'd start talking to you, and you look, do they have any teeth? Because it's all black, and it's a permanent stain. And one thing we did find out, that you can tell if a lady is a single person or married, because the single ladies don't chew it, so their teeth are nice and white. So once they find a mate, then it kind of goes out the window, and then they start chewing the betel nut, and their teeth are black. So that's an interesting fact.
Interesting.
One thing for me, our unit mapped up, we were in base camp a lot. I never really went to the men's barracks very often. I left that up to the student sergeant, but I saw no deficit in performance of my men there. But again, we were not really stressed because we were not out in combat. We were just a supply function.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Bob, you talked a little bit about going to the local orphanage. Could you expand on that some, and just any of you share any experiences you had with the local civilian people, the food there, the culture in general?
Well, because of the fact that I ran the road, and they talked about Highway 1, I ran Highway Run going to different bases and stuff. So we would stop and we would actually purchase certain things on the way from different places, you kind of had a sense that they were happy to see your money, but not so happy to see you. You had to protect yourself at all times. If you were off the base, and even on the base, but off the base, you really had to protect, because you never knew when a 10-year-old kid is going to run up and throw a satchel charge at you. You never knew whether the young lady over here was going to do something, or the mama san, or the papa san. Lots of things happened during that time. We learned their culture was totally different. Okay, how they cooked, what they cooked with, was not anything we'd ever come across. There was a thing they called Nook Mam. You can purchase it at a Vietnamese restaurant or at a supply house. Nook Mam, I could drive down Highway 1 at 40 miles an hour, and I could tell you where there was a Nook Mam pot. Because what it is a pot that they buried in the sand with a layer of fish, and not clean fish, a whole fish, layer salt, layer fish, layer salt, all the way to the top. Put a lid on it, and they buried it in the sand about that far under the sand. And when it started working, you can just imagine what this Nook Mam might smell like. Well, what they did is when it rotted, the liquid came to the top, and that was their cooking oil. So the thing I never forgot was the smell of Nook Mam. And when they were cooking, I never wanted to try any of their food, because it all reminded me of that stinking fish oil.
Yeah.
We actually have a bottle now that we demonstrate. And let me tell you, I always pick and always try to find the best teacher, the best cook, and say, "You're the best cook. Come up and tell me what this is." And we pass it under their nose, and it's like, holy moly, who rotted it?
Shock to the system, huh? That sounds like it would be quite pungent.
It's very pungent.
We get a kick out of it for sure.
But it was popular.
They have a lot of different things in their society.
We would trade our sea rations for some of their rice and things like that. They have bananas over there. It's a little different variety than what you see in the stores here. It's a little bit shorter and thicker. Tastes the same, but it's just a little bit different variety. And the rice was good. It's not processed like we have here. We take a lot of the nutrients out when we bleach it and process it. Theirs was just straight from the field. All the very nutritious and very tasty. We used to use some of their meat products, and we never knew what animal that it came from. But you didn't want to offend them. If they offered you some, you ate it. And I assume that I ate dog over there. You don't know, but they do eat animals over there, their dogs and things like that. But we had a lot of contact with them. We did med caps, what we called it. We'd do medical treatments for the folks, because they don't have medical doctors like we have here. They just can't. If they're sick, they go to the corner doctor. They're few and far between. So they come every time we go into a village. We would have a big lineup of guys coming in for different treatments. So we did that. So we made friends with them that way. They were glad to see us in that sense, that we could get medical treatment.
Very good.
I never really did much with the people over there. My mission was to do my job as best I could, and then come back as whole as I could. And dealing with the Vietnamese population, I thought was kind of counterproductive, because you didn't know Charlie from regular Vietnamese. So I must confess, I was not very outgoing with the population. Now, I did have a translator with our unit. I go into Saigon and have to deal with the Vietnamese army with their maps, because they got their maps from the same source we did. One time we stopped at the PX, I bought some beverages, some Cokes, pops for somebody. And I remember the Vietnamese guy looking at the pop, holding it, saying, "It's warm on the outside, it's cold on the inside." He'd never seen a styrofoam cup. So we gave him all our styrofoam cups, so he could take them home and have them. So that was the extent really of my dealing with the Vietnamese. It wasn't that I didn't want to. It was something I didn't think I should do.
Right on.
We had to be careful too when we had stuff that we gave away and took to the dump pile. They would confiscate and use like tires. They used to make their what we call Ho Chi Minh sandals. They would cut up the tires, and we've got a demonstration when we do our presentation, and we show them what they are. But they take the tires, and on the bottom you can see the treads. Then on the other side they take the inner tube and they make straps, so it's just like a sandal that you would see here. But yeah, they take all of our tin cans, and you'd use the tin cans to make their grenades out of. So anything like that, we didn't want them to take. But they made use of anything that we threw away. So we had to be real careful not letting them pick the dumps and taking some of that stuff out of there.
Yeah, it sounds like they're very resourceful,
Very resourceful.
and to make use of
Very
everything
intelligent.
what they had.
The sandals were the smartest thing that ever were made over there in the monsoon season.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't get foot rot
No.
Mm-hmm.
because their feet were dry all the time. And
They could breathe. Yeah,
Tires
yeah.
didn't get wet.
no,
I do remember seeing some kids as I did drive into town with get laundry and other things that the kids they'd have a stick with thing and they'd have two cans on it and they'd roll it and it was the one can would turn the other and make big noise. That was a toy for them.
Mhm. Well, we've done some lessons in class from the World Wars about how dogs were used and incorporated. And in talking to you guys, I guess none of you actually worked personally with the dog, but could you explain how dogs were used in the Vietnam War?
Well, they were used for security around the bases too, and their big asset is their sense of smell. When they were out in the jungle, they could actually smell the humans. They could smell the enemy, and they would alert the handlers. And they also could smell munitions, so they would alert us to booby traps. And once they discovered maybe a tunnel complex, sometimes a dog would go down with a tunnel rat and ferret out the enemy. The problem is, once the war was over, the Americans decided that the dogs were listed as equipment, and they left them behind. They would not ship them home. So the dog handlers had the choice of either euthanizing their animal or giving him to the Vietnamese. Well, the problem is the Vietnamese use dogs as food source. So the dog handler said, "There's no way in the world am I going to leave my animal for them to eat." So a lot of these got euthanized. Nowadays, from the Afghanistan and Desert Storm, the animals are brought home, and once their service time is over with, they're allowed to be adopted, by their veterans if they want. But back then in Vietnam, we left. I think there were like 4,000 dogs that were left behind that were killed because they weren't able to ship them
That's
home.
unfortunate. Yeah.
But, I think the statistics show that they basically saved about 11,000 lives with the things that they detected.
No.
So they were very, very valuable. And it's a
Man's
very
best
shame-
friend. Right?
Very shame we left it behind.
Yeah. Recently in class, we did a lesson on booby traps, and I think that's a big difference from the previous wars we've covered in class to Vietnam, just with more guerrilla style tactics. Could you guys talk about any experiences you had or any of your friends may have had with booby traps, and which ones maybe gave you the worst nightmares at night, or the ones that you thought were the most lethal or dangerous?
Wow. Well, being a corpsman, of course, that was kind of my job, is to fix them up after they took one. But my second casualty over there, I'd only been there like 2 weeks. On patrol, one of our guys went over a hedgerow and heard a big explosion and said, "Oh boy, what's happening?" As I got to him, he was sitting in a pretty good sized crater, and his right leg was missing from the half his calf down, and the meat was all kind of shredded that was left over, and he had a piece of bamboo that was embedded into the stump from the tripping device. And he just looked down when I saw him and he said, "Doc," he said, "it's bad, isn't it?" I said, "Yeah." And he says, am I going to die? And I said, "No, you're going to make it." So he relaxed and he took a deep breath. I gave him some morphine, patched him up, and medevaced him. And I heard from him later. He went to Japan and got sent home. But booby traps in our area, we had the most amputees of any unit in that time frame in the area we were in. And later on, the Army did an investigation. How come you guys are losing so many guys to booby traps? And once their finding was done, that we were the heaviest booby trap area in the whole country. Instead of having the hand-to-hand fighting, they just set booby traps. And then as we're looking for the enemy, we would trip them and take ourselves out of business. But what they would do too is our unexploded ordnance. Some of the ordnance we had was left over from World War II in Korea, and some of it, when it was fired, they didn't explode. So they were laying out there. If we didn't find them and destroy them, they would use them as booby traps. So a lot of times it was our own munitions that they were using to rig up for booby traps. So, I mean, they used everything from homemade grenades to our own ordnance to stuff that they had. But they were very effective. They didn't have to have a large amount of troops. The Viet Cong did. They could just take a lot of casualties just by using the booby traps.
Sure.
Kind of like what they're doing today, the IEDs that they use in Afghanistan. It takes very few guys to destroy a unit if you put all these IEDs out there.
Yep.
They were also very resourceful with their bamboo.
Yeah. Yes.
They would, the punchy sticks, where they would bury them in the ground. You'd come by, and of course they had excrement on them from animals or humans, and you would step on them or whatever and go through your foot. And if you didn't get treatment right away, that poison, the sticks would get you. But then they learned that, well, heck, the troops finally got steel plates in the bottom of our boots. So what did they do? They started hanging these things up in a tree, cocking a limb back. When you come through, if you weren't paying attention and you hit a tripwire, this would come around
Whack
and whack you that way. They also would dig what they call tiger pits. You can imagine just a pit in the ground. They take whole bamboo poles, put them up through, and then cover them. So when the fellas walking through, if they're not paying attention, they walk and they fall in this thing right on top. But they did a lot with hooking up stuff from people working on the base. Supposedly your friend that we're defending, they would hook up booby traps right on the base if you weren't careful. So booby traps took out a lot of people.
Yeah.
I've often heard the Vietnam War referred to as the helicopter war. Could you guys talk about any experiences you had with helicopters personally? How much time did you spend up in them? And how were they used broadly in the war?
Well, being assigned to a Marine unit, whenever we went into a large-scale battle, we would go in by helicopter. And we use the CH-46s, which are kind of a medium size. They could carry about 20 troops fully loaded. And that we will be inserted into a combat zone by helicopter. And usually you would have maybe 8 or 9 helicopters with about 20 guys in it. And you would land and then do your advance. And I was on helicopters a lot. We also use them for medevacs. So my job was to patch up the wounded and get them medevaced out. So once I got them stabilized, we would call for a medevac, and we would have to secure a landing area so they could land safely without getting shot at. And then once they got landed, we had to put them aboard the helicopters, and we used them all the time. We didn't use the Hueys that they used for gunships much. They just were kind of escorts to security for the landings, but we used the helicopters a lot.
My experience with helicopters was because I was in supply. We worked underneath them when they would come in with cargo nets full of supplies, and they wouldn't land because they didn't want to be a setting target. So they would come down. As soon as the cargo would get close, they'd drop it, and away they'd go. I worked under them quite a bit, but I was lucky or unlucky. I don't know which. I had a friend I made that he was a Green Beret and was stationed in the Trang. And I went up there, and my first experience in a Huey was going up with him because he flew Hueys. Well, let me tell you, I didn't think a helicopter could go like this. And I was in the door where the door gunner was. And I didn't like it at all. I had rode in Hueys before, but not, or after that, but never like that. So I told him I didn't want any more part of this. Take me down and don't put me up in the air anymore.
It's quite a ride. There's a lot of vibration.
Noise.
Yeah, it's very noisy and a lot of vibration because, when the props are going around, you get, and it's very noisy. You can't really hear people talking, so it's a lot of hand signals. Yep. And then you got to be careful the prop wash when you get off the back end of it. Ours, we exit the back end of it, and you had to duck. You didn't want the blades to get you, number one, and the back wash would knock you down. So you had to be careful approaching and get down and off of them. But it's a thrill to ride them, I'm telling you.
Well, that's a perfect segue into next. What would you regard as the most dangerous job that a serviceman could have over in the war?
Well, we do address that a little in our presentation when we do it, and my research on it and stuff. We're tunnel rat. A tunnel rat has to be the worst job and the most dangerous job there was ever in Vietnam. Usually it fell to the guy that was the smallest. And because the enemy would dig complete hospitals, living quarters, whatever, underground in these tunnels, they were very small people. Okay, so we had to have the smallest guy, myself or Doc or John would never fit down. Luckily, because they would send those guys down there with a 45 and a flashlight. They would go down there in those tunnels, and we talked about the snakes before. Well, snakes like those tunnels too, so it wasn't only the enemy they had to worry about. They had to worry about snakes. They also had to worry about booby traps down there in them tight places. Then they would come to say a tunnel going up. They'd come up with their 45 and their flashlight. They may be coming up into a room full of the enemy. So they had to be very careful when they always stuck their 45 and their flashlight up first because when they didn't want their head going up.
Yeah.
But it was a terrible, terrible, terrible job.
It was interesting how they tried to destroy him. It used calcium carbide and some water, and that forms acetylene. So they gas, get the acetylene in there, then they throw a stick of dynamite down there and set that off, and that would set off the acetylene. The only trouble is you didn't know where the tunnel was, so you sometimes the ground gave way underneath you.
Sure.
They were all over the place.
Yeah, another real dangerous job too would be the radio man in a patrol, because he's got the big radio pack on his back with an antenna. It's very visible to the enemy, and one of their goals was to take out your communications. So if you took out your communications, they weren't able to call in airstrikes and support. So that would be an advantage to the enemy. And also, that they take out their leaders. They were always looking for the officers, and they would try to take them out because they figured if you took your officer out, then there would be chaos. Mm-hmm. And then the next one, very dangerous, was the corpsman, because if you take out their medical care, there were more casualties that they couldn't get the medevac, so that would just create more havoc. And then the machine gunner, and they wanted to, if they could locate the machine gunner, you take him out, and there goes a lot of our firepower. Mm-hmm. So those people were, their life expectancy over there was not great.
Yeah. So they had a priority list.
Yeah. They actually had a bounty. They actually had a bounty on some of these positions, especially the radio men and the corpsman.
Yeah. All right. Well, next up, I would imagine being over there, like we talked about, it would be very stressful. And unlike today, where you have satellites and cell phones and you're easily able to communicate with your loved ones, you're never apart from them, you're getting text all the time. It was a different era back then. Could you talk a little bit with how you communicated with loved ones and family and friends back on the home front?
Well, first off, communication was by letter. Mm-hmm. There was no other way to communicate back. The problem being with the letter that it, most of the time would take up to 3 weeks before you got the letter home or they got a letter to you. Sometimes they come a little quicker, and sometimes it might be 3 months. Or sometimes you'll get 5 letters all at once. It's just the way that it worked, depending on where you were and whether the mail caught up with you. Problem with this whole communications thing was it was a TV war. It was the first TV war. So I'll give you for instance, my base was overrun. All right. So my mom and dad and my wife were sitting at home watching the TV, and my particular base has been overrun and 12 guys have been killed. 3 weeks later, they worried for 3 weeks or more, because 3 weeks later I wrote a letter saying, I'm okay, I didn't get nothing. So you had that very long lag. So sometimes the pressures that we talk about were heavily on the people at home than they were on us. We knew what was going on. They didn't. So they sat home and watched the TV, and the TV made it look worse than it really may have been, and they hid some of the things that we had to go through because it wouldn't make as much news, I guess. Mm-hmm. But it was very difficult, and these guys did the same thing. It's very difficult no matter where you were, your loved ones didn't know what was happening to you.
Right,
Mhm.
right.
So all they seen was on TV, and if it happened to be, bad, they figured it was bad for you, whether it was in this part of the country or this part of the country. So it, I can't imagine being able to see my family on a computer or talking to them every day. No, never heard for 367 days or whatever days you were there. You didn't have any contact with them other than a letter they wrote.
So even phone calls weren't really an option.
Well, if you had an emergency, they would hook up a satellite.
Kind of the Mars system,
My-
like a
Mars,
series
yeah.
of CB radio that it would be
But
transferred back and
No,
forth.
you had no access.
No.
You
Yeah.
signed, for me, you signed up for those. I think I had 3 Mars calls while I was over there. And one was just before my R&R, so we could coordinate it. But yeah, that was over the you have to over and everything because they were talking through hams. The other thing my wife did was we did. I got 3 tape recorders, one for me and one for my parents, one for my wife. So we taped. But again, the delivery system was just as fast as with a letter or slow. The other thing my wife did I thought was really clever is my daughter was only a couple years old. She bought 2 copies of the books, and I would read the book as though I was reading it to her next to me, and my wife would sit my daughter down, and they'd play the tape, and they'd go through the book. So I was reading.
Very cool.
So she was not afraid of me when I came home because she was used to my voice, and I guess maybe my picture too. I don't know.
Good deal.
That was very smart of my wife to do that.
I got the call when I was on R&R. I got a 5-day R&R trip to Hong Kong, and I decided to try to call home from there, which I did, but I didn't remember that the time difference was quite a bit, like 12, 13 hours. So I'm calling early afternoon, and it's like 3 o'clock in the morning there, and they're getting a phone call, and they said, "Will you accept a call from certain?" They said, "Hong Kong," and they had no idea where I was, so they did, and they kind of, "Oh, it's fine." So they were happy to talk to me, but it was quite a shock to them. But they had no idea that I was even on R&R because the communication was lacking.
Sure.
They told me one thing too when I got home. They said there was one day where there was a Navy car, official Navy car, pulled up and parked across the street, and they got that crap. And it was a recruiter that was going to talk to somebody that was across the street, but they thought they were going to get that notification. So
Yeah.
so they had no clue, if I was safe or not or what was going on. But they gave them quite a start.
Yeah. Quite a disconnect because I think most of the students that'll be watching this video, they've grown up in an era where communications is just a whole different world. But yeah, I remember back to my youth where, pre-cell phones and internet and all that's a whole different world.
We had very little communication.
Yeah.
Brings up a point kind of on the side on the R&R. It shows you how soft I had my job because when we had at the mess, they always had powdered milk. We constituted from powdered milk, ice cream, everything. And that was not very delicious. So when I had my R&R in Hawaii, the first thing I wanted was a half gallon of milk and some ice cream, just for normality. But that shows you again how soft my position was in relation to you guys. I don't think you ever saw a mess hall, except for
Very, very rare.
I ate every day in one.
Hot shot was a treat.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, the Vietnam War was also kind of the first war that was covered on the nightly news, and Americans were watching it. And like Bob said, it was, if it bleeds, it leads. You'll hear that in the news in general. So often it was a lot of negative, footage coming out of the war. And I think that contributed to the anti-war movement picking up steam and a big counterculture push, a kind of anti-Vietnam conflict. Could you guys talk a little bit about that and just give us your take on and maybe any experiences you may have had with the anti-war movement?
Well, my experience was quite often because before I went to Vietnam and after I came back, I was stationed out in San Diego in California. So there was lots of protests there. They would walk and protest in front of the bases. They would do a protest everywhere as you walk. When I got off the plane, and that's not just me, whoever got off the plane back from Vietnam and Seattle, Washington, and then dispersed from there, you were met by people that were calling you baby killers and killers in general. They would spit upon you if they could because of all the stuff that came out that we killed kids. Well, yeah, we probably did because they were trying to kill us.
Mhm.
It's pretty hard to imagine somebody killing a 10-year-old kid, but they would send them at us throwing satchel charges. So the news would pick it up, make it bigger than, we were saving troops' lives. We were saving ourselves. And they would make a big deal out of every little thing that happened. They didn't tell the whole story. They told the story that would sell news. And then when you got off and that happened to you, you wondered, why did I do what I did? So most of us would, they actually told us, as soon as you can get in civilian clothes, get in them, get out of your uniforms. And that's what we did. We went and hid, basically. We went and hid. We stayed in our own little world. We haven't come forward until probably we really haven't been out talking to people for more than 5 years, 6 years in our organization. Maybe however long it's been, but no matter where you were and what you did in the military, you all got that. They didn't know that you were in Vietnam or not in Vietnam. The only reason they knew it was in Seattle is that's where most of the West Coast came into. So it wasn't a pleasant experience. I just wish it would have been. If you're going to tell the news, let's tell the news. Let's not tell what says the newspapers or the magazines. But that's my take on this. Part of it, I think, it was probably because of where I was. I came back to California, so.
I was maybe a little bit luckier. When I came back, I had landed at it was Fort Ord or somewhere. I don't remember exactly. My memory's not that sharp anymore. But it was a military base, so I never saw any of it. I got discharged, so I was in civies when I went to the LAX to get a plane home from from California. When I was here, I went immediately to MSU, working on my master's degree, and I didn't have a whole lot of friends. So what I did have, I never mentioned that Vietnam. It wasn't until I got a license plate that said Vietnam on it that my coworkers knew that I'd been in Vietnam, because you just never mentioned it.
Yeah, my experience was pretty easy. We landed at LA International Airport. We were supposed to land at a Marine base, but weather diverted us to LA International. And once we landed at the international terminal, we saw a bunch of of young folks, hippie type, that they saw where we were coming from, and we could see them kind of talking among themselves. And then they started pointing. We could read their lips. They were saying baby killers, stuff like that. Security shoved us clear out of their area because our guys were starting to get pretty irritated. And they got us through customs, and they got us on a bus, and they took us to the base like real quick because they anticipated some trouble. But once I got home here in Michigan, I didn't really run into any anti-war business at all. But I kept my service pretty quiet for the most part. I stayed in reserves for a while, but I didn't advertise it like I do now. But you just kind of walked on eggshells for the longest time until you felt comfortable talking about it.
Well, I'm glad you guys are here sharing and have started going around and doing more talking on it. I really value your stories and sharing your experiences. Now, without a doubt, the Vietnam War has made a huge impact on just American culture and pop culture, definitely impacting the music industry. A lot of songs coming out that in some way, shape, or form tie into the Vietnam War, and a lot of movies. Could you share a couple of maybe your favorite songs that tie into the Vietnam War, and then a couple of your favorite movies or movies that you might recommend for any of the students that are interested?
Well, I think we all agree. Fortunate Son is one of them, and We Want to Get Out of This Place by the Animals is another one. there was lots of songs that came out of Vietnam era. Some good and some that bad. There's Country Joe and the Fish
Country
with
Joe.
this year that you had to clean up before you could listen to it. Don't play that one in school. But there was a lot of them.
Yeah, the one that comes to my mind is Leaving on a Jet Plane. I don't know what group sang it, but even when I hear it today now, it kind of brings back the feelings I had when I was getting on that plane to go over to leave the family, leave Detroit and go to,
That was a
Very
great
good.
time for music. If folks just listen to the music of the 60s and 70s, it's just good stuff.
I've told we've done quite a few different lessons that tie into music from that era, and I guess it's a subjective thing in my opinion, but I've often said that that's kind of the golden era of American music. I think like the 60s and maybe early 70s, a lot of good tunes come out of that
Yeah,
time.
go to YouTube and look at some of those songs and see the videos that go along with the music.
Uh-huh.
And boy, some of that's pretty amazing stuff.
Yep, I agree. And I'll be sharing some of those in class. So if you're a student watching this, most of the songs they hit there, I will end up sharing with you. How about any movies? Any good movies that you think would have covered the war pretty accurately and that you'd recommend to students that are interested in learning more about the Vietnam War?
Yeah, Full Metal Jacket is my favorite of all time. And
Mm-hmm.
it goes from a Marine boot camp unit. And they go right from civilian life to getting their haircuts and getting their indoctrination from the sergeant and all that sort of thing. They take you through boot camp, and then they take you through the Battle of Hue. But I thought that the boot camp part of it was perfect, right on point. That basically what the guys went through. And then actually the battle scenes were quite accurate too. Really loved that movie. And another good one that I think critics have said it is like 90% factual is We Were Soldiers Once and Young with Mel Gibson. And that told about the first real big battle of the war in '65 at the Idrang Valley with Colonel Moore, and which he's immortalized now in the Army.
One that I would say that was the total opposite was Apocalypse.
Oh,
That was a farce.
Apocalypse Now. Yep.
That was a joke.
That was a farce. I wouldn't recommend that to watch for anybody unless you just want to watch.
Hamburger.
I watched that movie, I think, when I was maybe right out of high school or so. I had just heard of it, and I don't remember a ton about it, but I remember it was a bizarre movie. Yeah.
And I don't know what it was supposed to accomplish.
It was just something Hollywood thought of.
Yeah.
Hamburger Hill's another excellent one. Casualties of War is another good one. There's quite a few of them out there, but those are, I think, the most accurate, and they'll get the most out of.
Sure.
Watch those.
What about Platoon? Have you ever
Platoon
seen
is
that?
excellent. Platoon is good too.
That's the side of the war that made the newspapers happy. And
Yeah. Definitely, that one has you come away with a negative feeling about it, and
But that stuff did happen.
Yeah.
I don't watch many Vietnam era movies. I like World War II, but for some reason I just don't like watching Vietnam. The one thing I did watch was Ken Burns' series on the Vietnam War, and I remember before when I was at Eastern about the monks, setting themselves afire and everything. I didn't quite understand why. That explained it to me. The other thing that really surprised me was when I got back home here that Tet was a surprise, and we knew what was coming. We just didn't know exactly where and how much, but we totally cleaned their clocks in Vietnam. But yet here it is that battle. Tet was a loss to us. But it bothered me until I saw what Ken Burns showed that what was going on back here with the press and everything. So I recommend his series. I thought that was quite informative.
Ken Burns does an outstanding job.
Yes.
Great documentary producer. So we every 2 years run a Washington, D.C. field trip here at Michigan Center, or it's offered to all of our students. And we hit all of the different war memorials. One of the most notable ones that we always go check out is the Vietnam War Memorial. Could you guys explain that? A lot of the students viewing this video will probably be going on the trip in the near future. So could you explain what the Vietnam War Memorial looks like and talk about it if you've ever gone there and seen it firsthand?
Well, I've been there, and I would recommend everybody go see it.
Yes.
It's very hard. I've been to it several times, but the first time was very hard for me to go. As you come down and you're coming down into the area of the wall, it's built in such a way that it honors those fellas and gals, but it gives you the feeling that you're there. This is my feeling. I feel like I'm there with the fellas and gals, but all those people on that wall that gave their lives for an unpopular word. Let's face it. But I think everybody ought to see it. I think it changed their mind about a lot of things, and it would change their mind about the war in general.
It's very sobering because you have 58,000 names inscribed on a black granite wall, and it just overwhelms you.
Yeah, I can't think of the word I want to use. It's not elegant, it's not got gold or anything. It's very simple, but yeah, it's very moving. Moving thing. The only places moved me more than Vietnam is when I was at Normandy to see the graves of the soldiers of Normandy, and I found Vietnam, Vietnam. But I thought most all the memorials there, the ones with the Koreans, and they have them in the platoon formation. They're all moving.
Very moving.
I agree. I think all the war memorials have been very well done, and they're all very unique too. They all have their own separate style and a different approach. So this has obviously, it impacted your lives quite a bit, your experience in the service and serving during the Vietnam War. Could each one of you just give a brief rundown and tell me, if you had to just kind of sum it up, do you think overall your experience and time in the service was a positive life experience, a negative one, or a mixed bag?
Well, I will say I was in the service for 4 years. 3 of the years were a good learning experience, a good life. I grew up real fast. Coming from Jackson and getting in the military was a whole different world. Nobody's there that will take care of you, but they'll take care of you. How's that? My 3 years that I wasn't in Vietnam were, to me, a good thing for me. And part of it I enjoyed. I didn't enjoy the regiment of answering yes sir, no sir, and all that stuff, but it taught me something. Now, a bad learning experience for me is Vietnam. If it hadn't been for Vietnam, I may have retired from the military, because I come from a military family. My father was in World War II. My brother served 22 years in the Air Force. My uncle was killed at Normandy. I probably would have stayed because it just fit what I like to do. But Vietnam turned me off, the whole thing, and it was a bad experience for me. I still to this day can't tell you if he was in my same unit, I wouldn't remember his name. I have a problem with PTSD. I don't hide it anymore. I think Doc and I came to that realization just about the same time. I choose to forget. But that was a bad experience for me. So I guess a lot of good, really, for me, and some bad. And some of it real bad. So that's
For me, I personally think that every student that graduates from or turns 18 should serve in this country. Most of them in the military, others that maybe in the Coast Guard or some other branch that's not so militant. So for me, the 2 years I was in the service were on the whole good. But again, I had a very safe job in Vietnam. I don't believe I have PTSD. I'm very lucky that way. Like I said, I've led a blessed life. And the reason I'm here doing things with Vietnam and other places is because I owe to this country, and I've had such a good life. I need to help people that aren't having so good a life. So for me, it's kind of a mixed bag. I learned a lot in the military. I was never going to be military. It was just part of my career. I planned it in. That's why I was in ROTC. When I came out, I was only going to be, I got discharged. And, in fact, I resigned my commission once I could because I'm not into the military. But I think it's a good experience for everybody to you learn discipline for starters, and you learn self-reliance, and it's a good thing, I think, for all. Yeah, 'cause you grow up. You sure grow up, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's it. You learn maturity. You come from a naive high school kid,
Mhm.
whether a year or two, you had to experience what you experienced, and you grew up like real quick. But you learn responsibility, you learn patriotism, that sort of thing, and that discipline stays with you throughout your career. I originally didn't want to stay in the reserves any longer than my original enlistment, but once I was required to go to the meetings up until a certain time, I started making friendships with other veterans, and because that was our therapy, we could talk. I stayed in for 24 years. That wasn't my intention, but it ended up being a career. And later on, it helped me, get into. I decided to get out of where I was working and get into the Department of Corrections. So I ended up working in corrections, and it's kind of a military type of structure. So that bode me well in my future job. And I ended up retiring out of Jackson here as a sergeant and ran my own cell block. But some of the negative stuff, PTSD, and which Bob talked about, it took me about 30, 40 years before I really addressed that and got some help for it. But it's still here.
Mm-hmm. I imagine that would really impact you for the better, for the worse, all of the above. So final question for you guys. Most of the students viewing this video are going to be freshmen or sophomores in high school, getting towards the end of their schooling experience and getting close to going out into the real world and being adults. Do you have any life advice? Anything, your 2 cents you'd throw at them? Any words of wisdom?
I don't know if they're words of wisdom, but
Yeah.
I would. I have 3 sons, and when they got ready to go out, I told them that mommy and daddy are here for you, but we're not here to run your life.
Right.
You might want to think about what you're doing before you do it. I'll be glad to answer any questions, but I never got smart until probably I was 25 or 6 years old, because according to them, maybe it was more like 35.
Maybe.
I didn't know anything. Well, I kind of know stuff now, and before that, but you need to listen to people that have experienced that thing you're going to experience. If all you do is just listen, and let's say John's and Doc's opinions are different from mine, still listen to all 3.
Mm-hmm.
Put them together, see which one and which direction you want to go in. Just don't go out there helter-skelter and think you own the world, because that's not the fact of the way it is. They just need to pay attention. That's what my big thing is. I see so many kids that go out there. Of course, my background with the kids, what I did for a living was, I've seen kids that had troubles in school, but with a little help directing them, I've seen them end up being fine, and I've seen it flip the other way. So just listen. That's my 2 cents, I guess.
Yeah. And it seems like for the longest time, everyone stressed you need to get the degree. Go to college, get a degree, but it's not for everybody. And if you have other skills, nowadays there's such a shortage of skilled trades, and that's where the money is nowadays. A lot of these people with degrees can't find work because there's nothing open in their field. But if you have a skill that's marketable, take the trade schools and get yourself a career. Don't necessarily think you have to go to college, because, like I say, it's not for everybody. And listen to your advisors. If you're not really having a direction where you want to end up, check out the service. They have so many technical jobs there, skill jobs, that you can get certifications for, and you get a hiring preference if you do have that background and good conduct discharge. So it may help you in the future. But the military has so many jobs available now, and there's huge bonuses. So that's some place to check out and see if that would be for you.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I just say, have a heart-to-heart talk with yourself, figure out what it is you'd really like to do for a career, and then go after it.
Mhm.
And I wish all the students out there watching this, I wish them the best. And
Well, yeah.
in their striving to have a career.
I think those were wise words all around. So thank you again for taking time out of your schedule to come in and record this video. We really appreciate you coming in and sharing your experiences. Thank you, fellas.
Thank you.
Welcome. Best of luck.